My name is Lauren, and I'm Collective Rewilding's newest team member. I am honored to introduce you today to very talented artists who are currently featured in our exhibition, Mapping the Cartographic, which opened on January 20th in the Fila Dramatida Gallery in Rijeka and is currently on view for anyone who wishes to visit in person. Today, Iman, Datoo, and Hara Shin have joined me to discuss non-human mapping. Hara Shin is a multidisciplinary artist working across reality, photography, and video. Her artistic practice explores the sensory properties of space and materiality. She earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Hongik University in Seoul and a master's degree in art and media from the University of the Arts in Berlin. Her artwork has previously been exhibited at Hatgyodye Gallery and New Space Galleries and the Art Center Nabi in Korea. Iman Datoo is an architectural designer and researcher and co-founder of the Emergent Knowledge Bureau. Using agents of vegetal origin, she challenges the colonial strategies that perpetuate the absence of indigenous practices in the scientific community, working between object, narrative, and film to empower the multiple voices who dictate and design place. She has presented her work at the University College London's Multimedia Anthropology Lab, Kingston University, and South Bank Center's Alchemy Festival. I am so excited to be here with you both virtually today. Both of your works seek to restructure how we approach the relationships between representative image and present physicalities. Iman, Economic Botany, traces the paths of the potato, seeking to decolonize indigenous agriculture by building a social structure of map making that relies on participation to grow. Hara uses a combination of various textures and audio to explore the inherent ephemerality of space and physicality. Both create alternative cartographies that challenge the ideas of traditional map making. So now that I have introduced you both, Hara, can I spotlight you to speak about immaterial mapping?
Yeah. I'm Hara Shin. I'd like to present today about my video work in material mapping. This video is an experiment for digital topography. We need something on object to figure out where we are. We set one target that can be used as a standard when you check the map. And through this, we understand the surroundings, substitute the world of the image into reality, and imagine the scenery of that place. By understanding and recognizing a certain figuration, we can deal with a sense of distance and a sense of movement. The object may be a common urban landscapes, buildings, or concrete street in the real world, or it may be nature, such as desert, valley, or forest. In addition, it may be also virtual cyberspace or cosmos that we cannot be directly reached, where the reality can only support the existence through technological equipment. In order to experiment with digital topography, I've started by erasing the absolute symbol that is necessary for traditional or realistic cartography. By erasing the symbol, you can be freed from the given direction, scale, and path for estimating an object in the map. And even the purpose of finding paths you want may not be important. So when I was making this video in material mapping, I wanted to realize a mapping that could trace a more cognitive and immaterial way, rather than a map that replicates realities. The scale and orientation of one object have no effects on others. They are independent each other. And as a method to measure my position and movement on the screen, I edited the video by crossing various textures. Various textures that are indirect experiences on the screen present places, object, artificial and natural object, natural elements, animals, plants, weather, etc. in the near and far perspective together, or by overlapping on the other screen. Sound is also one of the significant elements to perceive space and time. So it is included sound of diverse textures. The scene in the video drifts through cognitive space, representing spaces of actions and movements of cognitive behaviors. Elements, situations, and scenes that we experience and remember in real life, as well as even emotions and intuitions. These are the issues. This first motivates me to collect my sensory data based on the experience and memories as well. The starting point for this work to collect my sensory data was the experience of chaos, losing direction and location when I first traveled to the desert. Of course, desert is a familiar space to someone or some plants and animals. But until then, for me, the desert was everything as a background image on the computer screen or on indirectly unexperienced images in a documentary film about the environment or the planet, like a virtual space. In this video, I try to conduct a flow of images that are recurrently chained and the simultaneous movement and paths in multiple directions overlap each other with sequential interaction. For this sequential interaction, I use the green screen as a method for transition between space to another space. I've used this chroma key technique to insert other backgrounds, different backgrounds commonly used in the film. I directly expose the symbol color of the green screen in this video work. Tens of images on the screen, in fact, in tens of images as a digital image, consecutively interact with real and virtual space to perceive spatial impression and their incomplete localization. By reflecting on the possibility of drifting between perceived space and real space in digital era, the work deals with an expanded sense of space and disorientation in between those spaces.
Hopefully the audience has a little bit more time to sit with that. And of course, you can access it on Judomora's website. So thank you for sharing with us, Hara. That was excellent. I really appreciate your insight there. Iman, did you want to present on your artwork as well?
Yes, sure. Thank you both, Hara and Shin. That was really beautiful. I'll just share my screen. Okay. So I thought I'd give you a quick introduction to my practice, Kinomic Botany. And this work is on display at the Jugomore, but also online if you'd like to see it. So Economic Botany is a parallel botanical institution. We explore the many methods of mapmaking that exist beyond our human-centric depiction of worlds to ask what happens if we represent space not relative to the human, but relative to one another. So our ongoing project, Freeing the Potato from its scientific and colonial ties, uses mapmaking to challenge and destabilize the way we categorize, order, and arrange plants in the modern botanical garden. But why the potato? So the potato, a colonized specimen, is subject to a typical hero story. It was the reward reaped by conquistador Francisco Pizarro on his expedition to Peru in search for gold. But in that journey, the significance of the plant as a whole was erased, as were the nuances of the knowledge systems that surround it. The result, a spread of potatoes emerging from a narrow genetic bottleneck and a nomenclature to represent our movements across territories, borders, and bodies, as shown by this early research map, illustrating the use of space and economy to alter the inertness and agency of certain beings and bodies, and create this distinction between the human and the non-human. So despite there existing thousands of Andean names for the potato, we have reduced this to just 50 domestic varieties in the Western world. Our domesticated language unable to ascertain the potato seed's teaching of survival through variety and difference. So a pursuit of progress-time relationships has resulted in the loss of knowledge of old practices relating to cyclical time. This drawing, for instance, shows the seasons of potato cultivation according to cosmology and Andean rituals. Meanwhile, here is a 14-year cycle of creating a new cultivar in laboratories to achieve the perfect French fry. But now it is time to remember. I am more than my tuber. I am also my seed, my flowers, my fruits, and my roots. Indigenous botanists and cartographers practiced long before these sciences became political tools to advance a singular mode of thinking that placed the human at the center of its worldview. The Economic Botanical Garden acknowledges the malleability of botany and cartography to go beyond empirical truth and reason, recognizing that maps of tactile, cosmographic, visual, mnemonic, and other forms are used around the world to disseminate a more tacit reading of scale, time, and place. So now with this pot, we will find a portal from Q into the Economic Botanical Garden, following the potato into a parallel amorphous landscape designed to cultivate new map-making practices. Centered around a ceramic vessel, which defines the garden's spatial and social arrangement, we will work radially outwards to grapple with 4 fundamental questions posed by the potato. And the seed cartographer will respond with a series of cartefacts that defy Cartesian map-making principles. And these are of drawn, immersive, tactile, and oral qualities, just to name a few. Who are my friends? You have placed me in the family called Solanaceae, using the tree of life as a symbol to match me with other plants that share the same anatomical features, governing how you organize your order beds, such as this one. Oh, is it okay if I start that part again? Sorry.
You're good.
The video is not playing. Okay. Who are my friends? You have placed me in the family called Solanaceae, using the tree of life as a symbol to match me with other plants that share the same anatomical features, governing how you organize your order beds, such as this one at Q. But if I were to be planted with my family, we would fight for nutrients and spread disease. Notice how here in the Economic Botanical Garden, channels are marked not by trees, but by rhizomatic structures, our symbols of my intertangled relations between kin. I have found my place amongst the soil and the earth, rooted comfortably beside lettuce and spinach, sharing a network of nutrients with corn and green bean. I'm aware of a potato beetle hovering north of my territory, but the catnip, coriander, and tansy managed to stop the contaminant. The woody scent of sage and the leaves of nasturtium act as a magnet to the aphids, and the ladybird in their southwestern zone diverts their attention away from me. We have explored my contaminants and collaborations to develop a new categorization system by kinship and personality traits, sorting plants into roles of compassion, protection, intelligence, and foundation. We reveal how these kinship ties contradict the groupings of the plant tree of life and uncover the multiple ways of ordering nature. And then this is another question asked in the Economic Botanical Garden, which is, where are the wild ones? You have a good understanding of alpine wilderness, the tough, hardy plants that grow above the tree line and below the snow line in temperate zones, marked by distinct seasonal changes. These are the environments you attempt to mimic back home, emulating their form and landscape in miniature rock gardens, such as this one at Kew. The world of wild alpine plants is known and named, but have you heard of my home, the Paramo? I am one of 234 wild ancestors of Solanum tuberosum. Here in the Paramo, we are not known for our flowery flesh, but for our brightly colored flowers, transported via carriage in the spiky pollen sacs of the Bombus robustus. Here I take root in multiple ecosystems, such as the high grasslands of Cusco, nestled beneath the queen of the Andes, sheltered from days which feel like the hottest of summers and nights the harshest of winters. I thrive in soil types that are black and saturated, but also dry and xerophytic, taking root in the sandy clay soil with Coreocactus edicea, in the canyons of Yanco Cunca, and at the edges of field borders and forgotten agricultural terraces. I cling to the sides of mountaintops with Stipa ichu. We may not be tasty, but we are tough. Here, we shift scale to meet eyes with my grandfathers in the Paramo to explore how external environmental conditions influence plant anatomy and disease resistance. Instead of producing botanical illustrations that map plant physical and morphological features, instead we draw soil types, atmosphere, light intensity, amongst other features that influence my diverse set of mechanisms for disease control. Here we shift scale to meet eyes with my grandfathers in the Paramo, to explore how external environmental conditions influence plant anatomy and disease resistance. Instead of producing botanical illustrations that map plant physical and morphological features, instead we draw soil types, atmosphere, light intensity, amongst other features that influence my diverse set of mechanisms for disease control. So these are just two of many questions posed by the potato within the virtual world of economic botany. And the other maps that may exist, like the stick map, can be explored with the exhibition, within the exhibition. So just to quickly summarize, economic botany is an educational resource that in its process of construction asks us to embrace the contradictions of living in multiple worlds. To enter the economic botanical garden defies empirical knowledge, allowing for numerous readings, times, and memories to occur in one dreamscape or world. The maps communicate like stories as tools to offer sensory codes outside and memory codes outside one's own immediate environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Iman. That was beautiful. I have seen your video, and honestly, having you present it and having, you know, a little bit more of your dialogue in there, really, like, it's a fantastic work. So I'd love to hear more about your guys' processes. So for Hara, how did you like select your textures and visually format it, and the kind of linearity of the video? How did you decide to order that?
Based on the references, theoretical text, 10 assumptions were made for Imaterial mapping. The script began with the concept of psychogeography, firstly discussed by the Situationist International. This international organization of social revolutionaries made up of avant-garde artists and political theorists at the time. The emergence of metropolitan cities in the 20th century and the destruction caused by world wars have changed people's perception of the place and a sense of location and movement. Their discussion of denying the absolute utopia of reality and suggesting the possibility of drift applies to the current situation as well. The present expanded internet space, networking environment, epidemics due to virus, civil wars, and unexpected natural disasters are making the space we live in more complex. I put assumptions for Iman mapping on the main concept of the possibility of drifting on the complex hybrid spaces. In ubiquity technology and extended digital network environment among physical many realities, especially for an individual who temporarily participates in a particular space, community, or meta. The assumptions for Iman mapping are obscurity, fragmentary beauty, ephemerality, personal empowerment, voluntary alienation, transition, uncertainty, new synthesis, randomness, virtuality. The scripts excerpted from the theory-based texts appear in the video along with the assumptions. And I made the video through the process of editing the images of the drifting space together.
Yeah, the diversity of like tactile and textural elements you have really contributes to the ephemerality, or your idea of the ephemerality of space and landscapes. So I really appreciate that. And Iman, I'm very curious, how did you select your cartographics? How did you develop like the forms of those?
So I guess it kind of came from those 4 questions within the video. Like, I was really interested coming from a background, well, not coming from a background in botany and being, I guess, an outsider to that world. Like, I had these 4 questions, like one of them, for example, being, who are the potato's friends? And so, like, within botany, you're confronted with this tree of life, which explains this sort of hierarchical way of how different plants are arranged and categorized. But it's sort of one way of kind of viewing how to arrange and categorize those plants. And I was really interested in, well, these are its family members, but if you were to plant the potato together with one of its family members, like the tomato, they would fight and spread disease. So what about their friends? And I think by coming up with those questions first, I was then able to find the kind of right media for the cartofact. So for that particular question, it made sense to kind of maybe make a traditional map, but sort of reorient or recenter it around the potato. Mm-hmm. Whereas for another map that was kind of exploring the absence of time within these spaces, it made sense to make a more 3D map. And so that's where, like, there's another example of a stick map which shows how to kind of measure potato growth and cultivation according to astrology and stars. So I guess the sort of output of the map really was informed by the story that I was trying to tell and the kind of connection I had formed with the potato through that story. So it was more kind of driven by finding the best medium for that particular narrative and finding the best way to communicate or express it, than actually a desire to work with a particular medium to start off with. And then the space itself, which is the space to kind of store these artifacts or cartographics actually, is actually just made of clay. So these are all clay models that I have scanned and processed in this 3D virtual world. And that was really, again, rather than like thinking so much through my head, because I was really struggling at that time to actually create something material or create this non-human perspective, because to create a perspective of a non-human when you're a human, it's kind of an impossible task. So working with clay is something that I've always done, and I do in many different forms, and I work with it in many different forms. So it became a way for me to sort of switch off my mind a little bit and start making these sort of sculptural pieces that would sort of sit within this landscape and maybe give this impression of a world that was so different to a botanical world or garden that we might experience in real life. So all of these different media coming together is an effort in world building and creating this world that is so different to a botanical garden that we may experience or we may operate within, or scientists may operate within, to, I guess, offer this alternative or this space that allows for all of these different readings of time and space to occur within one environment. If that makes sense.
No, it does. That's fantastic. I appreciate that. And you know, your works are both very unconventional in relation to map making and also contemporary art in general. Do you want to speak a little bit about how your work kind of subverts traditional cartography and, you know, physical maps that we usually use to perceive space?
Traditional maps are created based on representation of reality. So fixed monuments and symbols such as street, mountains, and seas or landmarks cannot be moved. The map for imagery mapping but can drift through space, allowing multipath material permeation and transition. We can also reverse time or play fast. It has become possible to create effective maps that are not of the functional, political, military, or cultural purposes of the past. The act of drawing a free path expands the influence of the certain self-empowerment. The extension of the power of the enormous individual in the digital society is, of course, an ambivalent discussion in some respect. However, it would be meaningful to try that maps could be produced without any privileges of a few in a centralized form. It is also about overdrawing the power of the past traditional maps in the current fluid territories.
Iman, do you want to talk about how your work kind of subverts traditional cartography and you know, how we interact with place?
Sure. So I come from a background in architecture, and the project actually started as a thesis project in my final year of architecture school. So up until then, I was quite used to drawing maps and plans using traditional cartographic conventions, like, you know, at particular scales as well, whether that be like 1 to 25 or going up to 1 to 5,000. But the unit I was part of really encouraged us to explore this additional dimension that we don't usually explore in architecture school, which was time, and I guess kind of similar to Hara. And that's not necessarily a dimension that the 2D map is necessarily good at depicting. But there's a long history of map making outside modern cartography that explores space through a time lens too. And these are not new media, they've existed for a long time, and they may not be universally understood, but they offer, and they're not always meant to be universally understood, but they offer these sort of deeply personal and intimate readings of the world around us. And so with the project, the maps don't necessarily aspire to a universal truth status. Instead, I see the maps as more this opportunity to play and draw new connections with the plant world, and a space, and map making as a space to explore our different lived experiences and become more aware of the kind of agencies and dependencies of the potato as well. So the fact that my understanding of who the potato's friends are, for example, would be very different to yours, or would be very different to a potato farmer in India, for example, is that's okay. And it's okay that they can contradict each other and can exist within the same space, because in a way, the maps are there as communication tools, because, you know, I might have a very particular way of understanding or approaching something because of my background and my history and my discipline and my culture. But that map can be used as a communication tool with a botanical scientist who also may have their very own particular way of understanding something based on their discipline too. And so I kind of see the maps as sitting sort of between these different disciplines as communication tools, or as bridges, and ways, and as like stories almost. The reason why they exist in this space with a narrative behind them from the perspective of the potato is, I guess, to kind of give an insight into how that map should be read in a similar way to a legend or a key. And so I'm really interested in the ways we can sort of bring back those ideas of cartography that exist in other media and other forms, and re-explore them, but then also invent new forms of cartography too that may exist in these sort of virtual landscapes, or they may exist in real space too. But really having that conversation and opening up that conversation on how we diversify and share knowledge about the plant world, but through maps.
Yeah, I love how your work kind of deconstructs anthropocentrism while at the same time like acknowledging different cultures of people, and how people's backgrounds kind of cause them to adopt different views on botany and maps and everything that we interact with in the world. So we're almost out of time, but I found this talk to be really enlightening about both of your artworks, and I have just a couple more questions. Hara, what would you want the audience to take away from your work? If they took away one thing, what would you want it to be?
I want audience to imagine the experience of drifting, not only in the physical space in which they stand while doing my work, but also in the space they felt and perceived as special impression. I hope the video doesn't just read as an interaction between virtual and real. As a larger virtual space, an imaginary space that can drift, can turn time into the future, but it can be also recall the past. Tracing a multi-perspective map without a linear hierarchy has the potential to give an individual's practical purpose rather than original social purpose of the map.
So you'd like them to take away the perspective of entropy and how everything is connected, and we're living in an increasingly global world, which is what this exhibition is all about. So thank you. And then Iman, how would you like the audience to engage with potatoes and other kind of colonialized botanicals in the future?
I guess I want my audience, if they haven't done so before, to see themselves in relationship to the potato and to the plant world more generally, I think so often we revert to categorization systems and taxonomies to define these relationships for us, but they are by no means neutral. Botany offers just one perspective, but it also has a deeply rooted history in marginalizing particular voices, whether they be human or non-human voices. And so I really want this project to contribute to more open conversations and honest conversations about how we diversify and share knowledge within the botanical world, but also beyond the botanical world. And I really want it to be seen as an opportunity to start sharing knowledge across our different backgrounds, cultures, and disciplines, and celebrate the fact that this knowledge is not always a universal truth, but is often very contradictory. And so the aim is to really start this conversation and to push the project forward through a series of map-making workshops also, and to see what other ways it can exist, both in formal and informal settings.
Okay, thank you. So this panel session is a part of Collective Rewilding's public program, the rest of which can be accessed via Judah Moda's website starting on February 4th. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will continue to explore the website.